Hola, compañeros. It's your old pal King Waspinator, and welcome back to Total Party Skills. Be sure to hit like and subscribe. Now, as regular viewers may know, I'm getting a little bored of the whole D&D is bad subject matter. It's just a little stale. I mean, yeah, sure, there's always going to be some new little thing that someone might be able to dig up and make a little internet controversy over, but I mean, it's still actually just more of the same. So, I mean, whatever. But, because of that, I felt like, maybe doing something a little bit more positive and talking about a role-playing game that I've probably had the most fun with in the last 6 or 7 years. And that would, of course, be 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. The original loadout that I ran my first 5th edition adventure was, of course, the original core rulebooks, the Dungeon Master's Guide, the Monster Manual, and the Player's Handbook. It was still early days, though, when I did my little homebrew for 5e for the very first time, cutting my teeth on it. So all I had was, if you remember this little ditty, the Player's Companion for the Temple of Elemental Evil, which provided, a few additional races to throw into the mix, including, and the thing that makes this the most valuable, the presence of Genasi, which... I don't know if it's just me, but in my own observations, like what a oddly popular player character race amongst female gamers. Easily surpassing cat girls and elves and such. Also had Curse of Strahd. It was one of the very first adventure modules that they had put out. I wasn't using the Barovian setting or Strahd directly in the little adventure I wrote. It was a homebrew setting based outside of what was kind of billed as the last Shire, this last little colony of halflings to be found on the far frontiers of a crumbling empire. And player characters were, just some local people who had been hired by the sheriff of the halflings to go investigate some bandit attacks on the edge of their borders where his jurisdiction ended. And of course, it turns out the bandits were actually some local farmers who are being forced into attacking traders and stuff and robbing them because their kids were all being held hostage by a cult that was run by a Barovian witch and some beastmen servants that worked for her. And the actual real boss battle for the adventure, and possibly the low-key my most favorite thing out of the Curse of Strahd book, was the magical painting of Strahd himself. The Barovian witch is just like a challenge rating 1 boss. When they finally did get to her and catch up with her, they took her out pretty quick. But it was their encounter with the painting that really was the peak and went down pretty much perfectly. They weren't expecting it. Even the one player who seemed to be a little familiar with the Strahd and the Ravenloft setting didn't seem to catch on immediately what was going on. And the fact that it was using, magic spells to try to take control of the player characters and make them murder each other really sent nerves up high. And there was a frantic effort to just try to destroy this painting, which, of course, because since it has a surprisingly decent AC, was harder than you would think until someone thought to throw some fire on it. The other book I had, Xanathar's Guide to Everything, had just come out. Over the years, I mean, it's a book that does get whipped out a lot, at least during the character creation and setup part of running a game, but I pretty much only ever use it for the random name generator at the back. Maybe some of the minor magic items it has present. I don't know, there was a time there, and it's finally changed recently in like the last year or two, but for a little while there, the only game you can get up and running was Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. You try to go to, whatever online site you like using to try to find gamers to play something. They didn't want to come play Rifts or any of that other kind of shit, but if you said you're going to run a D&D game, suddenly you got way too many people asking to join, and all of them wanting to, hey, could you change the day that you want to do this on, or could you do this 5 hours earlier than you were planning, and all that other kind of shit. and you actually had enough the ability to kind of pick and choose from players there for a while. And like I said, recently there seems to be more of a broader interest and people being curious actually to play other role playing games. But yeah, for a hot minute there, D&D 5e was the only game in town, so to say. The longest campaign I ran actually came off of the Essentials kit, which I had bought, and then on a lark the next day started running with a couple of coworkers who were like in their 20s and were D&D curious, and that ended up lasting almost a whole year. And I ran a introductory adventure for Mythic Odysseys of Theros, and then the pandemic happened, and I don't know, X amount of players are paranoid enough so that I didn't really feel like continuing on with it. When I first got together with my wife and first introduced her to role-playing games, I ran her through the opening scenario of the initial D&D adventure that I had written for this, that I had run prior. I would say that maybe in 2015 or 2016, maybe a little bit later. It depends on when Xanathar's Guide to Everything came out, because it was right after that had come out when I'd started that. So I don't know, after the crushing disappointment of 4th edition and how its rules operated, 5th edition, kind of had corrected the ship there for a while. And a lot of like the things that are kind of quote unquote wrong with it now, in many ways simulate some of the problems that were cropping up with 2nd edition AD&D, especially towards the latter years of its run, where the more popular it's become, the more different kinds of people are wanting to get a slightly different D&D experience out of it, and it's pulling it in multiple directions. And so just like with old 2nd edition AD&D, modern 5th edition is starting to kind of get into that options overload with stuff like Tasha's guides and the make your own character kind of stuff. And it's not mysterious why it's annoying the more older purist types, but at the same time, you gotta like stop allowing people to politicize stuff for you, because yes, you didn't necessarily start this, you're not necessarily the one who injected this stuff into the game, but by reacting to it, you're kind of feeding into that politicization. So you got to remember that, like, if you're investing your money and time to be a dungeon master, there's nothing that anyone can do that can actually control how you want to run your game. And since all these things that they've added to it are optional things that are bolted onto the basic superstructure, you can still just run it the way it was in the original books. You don't have to include some of the more kind of oddball races or the artificer class or any of the optional character build your own kind of stuff that they've done in recent years. You can ignore all that. And no one can stop you. No one can force you to use consent rules against your will if that's not what you're into. Unless you've made yourself just really dependent on having to have a role-playing game store to go and run your games at. In which case, I don't know. Like, if you can actually really afford all these books and all the accessories, why don't you live somewhere large enough that you can host some people in your own damn living room? So, Hasbro is not going to come to your house and take your books away from you if you tell a player that's annoying you that they can't play with you. You're in control. And so, yeah, I don't, what is there to say? Like, there's a time when D&D 5e was like a healing balm on a battered and nearly dead genre. And, yes, now it's trying to serve too many masters, but when it comes to your own game on your table, you are the master that counts. So, I guess on that note, comment below some of your fond D&D 5e memories prior to it being ruined for you by Twitter and YouTube and all that kind of stuff. And until next time. words, and optional activities.